Okay, so we're actually going to try today to prove how to convert mixed radicals into just radicals and actually solve those radicals. So, let's start with mixed radicals. Okay, let's say a mixed radical is something where you have a constant, something that's not under a radical, and something that is under a radical. So let's say it's 2 times the square root of 4. Okay. Now, if we wanted to convert this into one radical under a full radical, we need to make sure that this is under a radical too. Now, we know that 2 is the same thing as 2 squared square rooted, right? Right? And then that's still multiplied by the square root of 4. Okay, so this is equal to the square root of 4 times the square root of 4, right? Now we know from our past videos that when you're multiplying, you're able to just multiply and put it under the same radical. So that's the same thing as the square root of 16. Now that's equal to 4, okay? So 4 is our answer, okay? So now moving on to well, we just solved a radical, right? That was just because 4 times 4 is 16. But I want to go into positives and negatives in solving. So let's still use the square root of 16 as an example. But the square root of 16 can actually equal plus or minus 4, right? And that's because 4 times 4 equals 16, right? So it is the square root. But negative 4 times negative 4 also equals 16, right? Because two negatives make a positive. So we would say plus or minus 4, right? Now let's do one more example where we will need to use solving with positives and negatives and also converting mixed radicals into radicals. So let's make this example now. So this mixed example, let's say 8 times 16 cube rooted, okay, times 4, okay. So we know this is just going to be equal. What's 4 times 8, right? That's just going to be 32. We're just putting these two together, the 4 and the 8 together to make a 32, times the cube root of 16, okay? Now we need to convert 32 into a cube root, right? So what is 32 times 32 times 32, right? So let's actually just pull up our calculator. Okay, 32 to the power of 3, right? That is 32768. So actually let's just move it down here. 32768 times the cube root of this, right? Times the cube root of 16. Now let's go back to our calculator. Now, what's that times 16, right? And then we will put that under 524228. So 288. Okay, that's all under a cube root, right? Okay, now let's actually evaluate that. So if it's a positive, right? Let's put it under the, let's just put it to the power of 1 divided by 3. That's the same thing as taking the cube root. So we took the cube root of that and we got 80 let's just round it to 80.6. So 80.6. Okay, so let's try another example. So here. let's say negative 16, is being square rooted, okay? What times what is a negative? Well, that's where your unreal numbers come in. So it's used by I, and I is equal to the square root
just
of
try
negative
and
1. Okay,
here.
let's just do this. So if I is equal to the square root of negative 1, okay, how many I, x times I, so an x amount of I is going to be equal to the square root of negative 16. Okay, the square root of negative 16 is going to be equal to the square root of 4, or let's just say 16 times negative 1, right? And that's going to be equal, you can pull out the 16, right? So it's going to be 4 times the square root of negative 1, okay? So if the square root of negative 16 is 4 times this, right? If this is 4 times this, that means that this must be 4 times this. So it's 4i equals the square root of negative 16, right? So it's not actually 16 times bigger, it's 4 times bigger, right? So you would always just use I to do negatives, right? It's basically the same as a positive, except it's with an I. It's basically saying that they're unreal numbers because there is no number that can actually be multiplied by itself to get you a negative number. So, 4 times the square root of negative 1, right? Still 4 times, right? Does that make sense? Can do another one? Just for good measure. Okay, let's say the square root of 36. Square root of 36. Negative 36, right? If I equals the square root of negative 1, okay? That means that 36 is equal, the square root of 36 is equal to the square root of 36 times negative 1, okay? Which is equal to 6 times the square root of negative 1, which is equal to 6i, okay? Which means that 6i equals the square root of negative 36. Think of it this way. You're still taking the square root, right? Except I is being used as a tool. It's a number that is a tool for people to show what the square root of a negative number is. It's still 6, right? 6 times 6 is going to be 36. But when you put that I there, that means that it's going to be negative. Okay? Alright. I think that concludes all of this. If you had any trouble with the pulling a number out of the radical, I'm going to be making a video on that next week or in a couple of weeks. So, yeah, stay tuned. Thanks for watching.